My name is Ralph Schultz. I'm broadcasting from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my new home, 100 miles north of Chicago. I am no longer in Albuquerque, New Mexico. What I'm going to talk about is why voting Democratic in the upcoming U.S. election is good for the economy and for you. And that's everybody, not just Democrats, Republicans, people who support Trump, the average man. Okay. So let me just say some facts. Economic power is both the source for building a strong domestic infrastructure, society, and a military. Right? Today's inflation rate is due to severe supply side disruptions that continue to this day and strong pent up consumer demand caused by the COVID pandemic, not substantially by any president, Trump nor Biden. You hear that, please? And contributing to this is the war in Ukraine with higher gas prices. So all this is also contributing was the huge federal financial stimulus we all received and the high unemployment compensation that benefited and rescued many people, including myself. I lost my teaching job when the schools closed for almost 2 years. I needed that money. I would have been stranded, to say the least, without it. So the U.S. economy is big, BIG. GDP, or gross domestic product, which measures the size of the economy, is about 21 billion plus in the U.S. China's around 16 trillion. I said it was 21 trillion, excuse me, which is 21,000 billion. China is about 16 trillion, Germany 4 trillion, Russia just under 2 trillion, and France 3 to 3.5 trillion. And the other European countries are in that range, the Scandinavian countries, Great Britain. The average wealth of American households that rent their home or apartment is only $6,000. And that's 1/3 of all households in the U.S. It's 50 million, all right, households. That's a lot of people just on the edge. People who own their homes have substantially larger net worths, in the neighborhood of 200,000. The largest subgroup, this is important, in poverty is single women with children, who comprise about 28% of all people in poverty, almost 1/3. About 15 million total people in the population of all ages, versus the U.S. poverty rate of 12%, which is about 40 million people. And there's about another 35 million people in what's called near poverty, which would be roughly incomes in the 20 to 25,000 range, because a woman with one child, or a man with an income of only 24,000, is considered at the poverty level. Near poverty, 18,000 for single people, and 12,000 is the old poverty rate, which isn't much money, I'll tell you. A lot of those people are less than 6,000 to 8,000. Okay, so the Republican Party recently voted down paid maternity leave and child care for those in need, people who earn under 50,000 or less. So, and now many young women will be forced to have children they cannot afford, and they will all be cast into poverty, which also will increase federal spending. Yet $60 billion is going towards Ukraine for weapons, and putting money aside for women to consume, to spend, to live on, would boost the economy, the GDP, and is morally the right thing to do. The number of people on food stamps or SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Aid Program, is 40 million, which is about $120 per person per month. Not very much. About 79 billion was spent on that the year ending 2020. Now it's about 119 billion because of problems left over from the pandemic. The total U.S. federal spending budget for the federal government is about 6 trillion today, which is 6,000 billion. Keep that number in mind. 800 billion is being spent on the military, and another 400 billion on national defense, like the CIA, Homeland Security, the Veterans Administration. Spending on the government, running the government, buying equipment and salaries and grants and so on, is about 1.2 trillion, about the same amount. And 3 trillion is being spent on a combination of Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, essential programs for people in need and elderly. Like myself, can't earn much money anymore if we haven't saved a real lot. We may have saved some, and some isn't much in today's environment. Here's an important and unknown figure, and I want everybody to remember this. I teach it to my economics classes. I got it from a good source. GDP growth, the growth of the economy, averaged about 4.2% net of inflation during years when the Democratic Party had the president, and about 2.7% when Republicans were in the presidency. That's a large margin of 1.5% per year. And you compound this over 70 some years since 1946 and adjust it for the years that one party exceeded the other and the size of the economy in those earlier years, you come up with about $6 trillion today, which means our GDP would be 14 trillion instead of 21. And our median income per household would have dropped from about 65,000 to 46,000. That's a big difference. Okay, so this dispels the myth that the Republican Party is the party of prosperity and jobs. It's not. Even if we challenge some of these numbers, there's no big advantage to the Republican Party in that regard. So think about it. Do some of your own homework. Since 1980 and the Republican takeover, the Reagan takeover of the U.S. government income distribution has become a very big issue and unequal, with most increases in wealth and income going to the very top. And what made this country strong is everybody participated from post-World War II for 25, 30 years into the 70s. And the U.S. middle class grew, at a much higher rate. And they had more power, and unions had some influence. So what we had, there is something called the Gini ratio, Gini, which is an economic concept, and it's mentioned on CNN. I've heard mentioned by the commentators and some of their pundits that measures income distribution. Think of it this way: it's a number, an indicator. The higher the number, the worse income distribution. In other words, the more income concentrated at the very top. In underdeveloped countries have high numbers, like South Africa is 70. A lot of those countries are in the 50s. Mexico is about 48, 50, I think. And U.S. is 45. Now, it was 36, probably about 35, 40 years ago. So it's worse. think it's worse. If you're at the very top, maybe you think it's much better. But it caused income and growth problems in the middle. China and Russia are in the low 40s. 40, I've seen numbers around 42, 44. And Germany is about 32. Canada is 33. The Scandinavian countries and France are in the 25 to 27 range. A lot of those South American and African countries are up in the 50s and 60s, where the people at the very top take most of the wealth. We need to equalize that. The tax rates have dropped considerably from 90, 70 to 90% in the 50s and 60s when we did have great growth to 35, 6% is the highest marginal rate now. The finance, the democratic programs that have been watered down or eliminated due to the Republican Party resistance. Joe Biden suggested a 3% marginal increase in higher rates from 36 to 39%, which it has been on and off since 1992. It's not a huge increase. That's for people who have a net taxable income of 400,000 or more. So if you're making 400,000, you'll have to pay 3% on the margin over 400. So if you made 500,000, you have to pay $3,000 additional in taxes. It's not a severe hardship to fund the country for the public good. And did you know that the most of the federal income support programs were all put into place in the 1960s and early 70s under the Johnson administration, a Democrat, and then Nixon, who was what I would call a more liberal type of Republican, also approved some of these, at least didn't try to overturn them. Things were different then. Things were more reasonable. And those Medicaid and Medicare were instituted then. Old people like myself, I'm 75, didn't have any health, government health back insurance. They had a rough time. And other programs put into place, increases in Social Security, urban transit, housing, subsidized housing, model cities, the educational loan for federal loan program was put into place, Pell Grants for low-income students, and the interstate highway system was completed, which cost a lot of money and has benefited the society, paid for with public funds. And during this era, from the early 60s to the early 70s, the U.S. poverty rate declined from 22 to 11% due directly to these programs. They worked, and the economy flourished. So if today if we didn't have the income support programs today, our poverty rate would jump from 12 to about 26%. In those European countries that are called socialist, which just means they have more government. They're capitalistic free market economies with more government programs and higher taxation. Their poverty rates are about 5 or 6% instead of 12, and they would also be up in the mid-20s if they didn't have those programs. Lastly, the Trump administration tax cut of 2017 predominantly went to the corporations and higher income people, and it did boost the economy along with deregulation from 2 to 2.9%. 2% had been the long-term growth rate, and that fell back though to 1.9 to 2% for the following 2 years, and of course the pandemic hit, and now it's back at 2.3% roughly, the long-term growth rate. So the tax cut resulted though now in a $1.4 trillion, that's $1,400 billion budget deficit, which when Obama left office in 2016, it was $500 billion. Okay. So The current unemployment rate is 3.6%. It's an all-time low. And the economy has some problems, but they're endemic to the environment for the most part. There isn't too much you can do about it. All right, thank you very much. And remember to vote and take care.